Tonight, one of Australia's most ruthless killers, Andrew Benji Veniamin, a hitman who shot dead 7 people as he murdered his way to the top of the Melbourne underworld.
He was absolutely fearless, would never take a backward step.
To those closest to him, gentle and charming.
Andrew was my soulmate, yeah. He was everything to me.
In truth, a cold-blooded assassin.
He didn't even get a chance to get out of the driver's seat before being shot in the head.
I would have never picked Andrew as a contract killer.
It's beyond belief that Victoria Police Force didn't know what he was doing.
Few who knew Andrew Veniamin ever thought he'd enjoy a long life. Nobody doubted he'd make his mark on the world.
Andrew was always going to, one way or the other, he was going to be somebody.
Tonight, clinical psychologist Dr. Leah Giarratano tells us why, of all the paths he could have taken, did he choose to go beyond the Darklands.
Andrew Benji Veniamin killed people for money. He chose to commit acts of evil and he revelled in the notoriety it earned him. But how does a man like Veniamin get to the point where he finds it easy to murder? Was he a psychopath? Was he a natural-born killer? The truth about who and what Andrew Veniamin really was can be found in his past.
Andrew Veniamin was the 3rd child of Greek Cypriot parents Apollo and Mariana. They arrived in Melbourne in 1970, just ahead of a wave of migrants escaping ethnic tension in Cyprus. Like many Greek Cypriots, the Veniamins settled in the busy industrial suburb of Sunshine in the city's west. But Australia's economic problems, rising unemployment and inflation, hit their chosen suburb harder than most. And by the time Andrew was born, on the 16th of November 1975, Sunshine was changing. It became renowned for street gangs, drugs and violence.
Police were told that, if you're going to go and work in Sunshine, you're really going to earn your straps, and the thing is that you've got to treat all kids like they're scumbags.
Sunshine was a tough place because you had to deal with such a variety of crime and you had to deal with people that were getting into crime at an early age. It was a tough working class suburb. You had a lot of immigrant families that had moved to Australia and the 2nd generation was now coming through.
Everyone knew everyone in the Sunshine area. There was the ethnic side and the Aussie side. Andrew was from the ethnic side, obviously.
He was a scrawny kid, but he worked out how to dominate the bigger and smarter children. A boy desperate for attention, he was driven by a realisation that if he wanted something, he'd have to fight for it.
He had to struggle because he was smaller, so he had to do more than what the bigger guy would, who's got a stature about himself.
Andrew's father, Apollo, worked as a welder at the nearby Sunshine Harvester factory. He was regarded as a hard man and someone to be reckoned with. At home, Andrew's mother, Mariana, insisted on a strict Greek Cypriot upbringing for her children.
Andrew looks a lot like his mum, but he was both of them combined.
Andrew was made an altar boy at their local Greek Orthodox church.
Very religious family. Andrew's mum goes to church. Family was very important to him and they were everything to him. He had a really, really soft side when it came to his family.
Andrew's house was your normal, it was nothing flash, it was your normal 3-bedroom house. It didn't have anything attached to wealth.
Andrew Veniamin followed his sister Helen and brother Stephen to Sunshine Heights Primary School close to their home. Because he used the anglicised version of his name, Andrew Benjamin, the other kids nicknamed him Benji.
Benji Veniamin's growing up in a tough suburb, so we can be pretty sure that from an early age he's seen violence or he's been the victim of it. And we know that violence breeds violence. Benji wants status, he wants recognition, and the lawbreakers in Sunshine have both. The criminals are the ones with power and money, and so they become Benji's role models in life.
Benji's next school was the rough, multicultural Ardea High. He began mixing with older troublemakers and was soon breaking the law himself.
A lot of the offending was street crime, assault police, indecent language, perhaps car theft.
The western suburbs is a pretty tough end of town, and you've got to be pretty tough to survive out that way. And he wasn't a big kid. And I remember I did say to him at one stage, I said, mate, it doesn't matter that it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog.
Benji was only 165 centimetres tall, just 5'5", but with a king-sized violent streak running through him. He started bodybuilding and learning how to fight properly.
Andrew came down the gym as a 14-year-old boy, and he said, I want to learn boxing. He only a little bloke, about 48 kilos. And I think he wanted to be able to look after himself. That's what I think.
Benji's best mate at Ardea High was a boy called Dino Debra, who had a reputation for aggressive behaviour. The two shared an appetite for crime. By the age of 15, they were dealing marijuana and stealing cars.
They were very close. Dino would have brought Andrew into what Dino was doing. Car rebirthing was the main thing that they were into at that age, and that was sort of their apprenticeship of getting into crime. They were knocking off a lot of cars and dropping it to rebirthing places, which were a lot of the panel beaters, the tow truck drivers. They'd be in with the tow truck drivers as well out there. And Dino introduced Andrew into it, so he was like, the master's apprentice.
Benji and Dino hated authority. They were expelled from school in Year 12 because of their standover tactics and intimidation of both students and teaching staff. But for Benji, there was one source of discipline he was prepared to accept.
He was a good boy. I couldn't knock him for anything wrong in the gym. When he's in the gym, he did exactly what I asked him to do. If I asked him to skip 10 minutes, he'd skip 10 minutes, Ask him to shadowbox, he'd shadowbox. There was no smarties or anything in him.
By 1993, he was stacking on muscle, using steroids and human growth hormones. He was training hard, aiming for the Commonwealth Games. The year before, he'd made the Victorian team.
He made our state team. He went to Darwin and fought in the 1992 Australian titles. He got beat his first fight, but competing, making a team was a big thing. And they were good fighters in those days too.
But his first major criminal conviction would blow his chances of making it to the Commonwealth Games. In early 1993, he took part in a violent heist of a cigarette delivery van. Veniamin abducted the driver and kept him prisoner for hours.
The case involving the cigarette salesman was terrible. He thought he was going to get killed, that fellow. He thought he would die.
This is a critical stage in Benji's criminal progression. Nothing will be the same again. He's still only a teenager, and yet he's just abducted and robbed an adult male, threatening to kill him. Benji's just realised how far violence can take him, and there's no stepping back now. The power feels great, he's out to make easy money, and he couldn't care less about the terror of his victims.
The police came down and he said, he stole a cigarette truck and we're trying to find him. So that's the first indication I got of Andrew doing that sort of thing.
I think he was caught because the police found all of the cigarettes under his bed at home. He wasn't terribly clever in those days.
In August 1993, Veniamin was convicted of robbery and false imprisonment and sentenced to 3 years in Melbourne's Notorious Turana Detention Centre. Bernie Geary was working in the juvenile justice system at the time.
Turana was a pretty rugged place for young people, and young people who weren't tough didn't survive very well.
Veniamin had grown up in Sunshine. He'd have no problem surviving in Turana.
The tough kids did it okay and got tougher.
He was always very popular with his peer group, and I would say a leader amongst them. Yeah, king of the kids.
10 years ago, a young person going in Tirana, the capacity or the chances of that young person coming out a better person were minimal.
Benji Veniamin's meeting all the criteria for a diagnosis of conduct disorder. That's where the rights of others and the rules of society are persistently violated. It's almost impossible for a 17-year-old with Benji's type of conduct disorder to be steered away from a life of crime. So even at this early stage of his life, Benji looks like he's going to grow into a very dangerous man.
Juvenile detention would do nothing to reform Benji Veniamin. It would harden him, physically and mentally. He was leaving his boyhood behind. Awaiting him was a career as a brutal underworld killer. By 1994, Benji Veniamin was 17 and had graduated from stealing cars and dealing cannabis to violent robbery. He was now serving a 3-year sentence at a tough detention centre called Tirana.
It was easier than a prison, there's no doubt about that. There were aspects of leave, home leave, if young people cooperated.
When Veniamin got a week's home leave, he and his mate Dino Debra decided it was payback time for the cops. Benji was serving the maximum possible sentence for a juvenile, and he knew any crimes he committed during that home leave week wouldn't add to his jail time.
They followed a police officer when he was off duty in his private car to a nightclub or something like that, and whilst he was inside they stole the car. They then drove the car out into the back blocks of the western suburbs and torched it. And they also found in, I think, the glove box a diary, and that diary contained the phone numbers of the Sunshine CIB. And at about 3 a.m, Andrew rang the police officer who charged him with the cigarette robbery and gave him a hell of a spray over the phone. The only problem with that was that the police officer recognised his voice immediately and sent the troops around, and Andrew was fairly promptly arrested for that effort.
2 years later, Benji was out of detention and running with a gang of local youths called the Sunshine Boys. At 21, he was still living at home with his parents, as did many in the gang.
At home, they can be themselves, and that's why they're the people they feel comfortable and relaxed with, so they can actually be themselves in the presence of those people. Everything else is a pretense. When they're out in the street and they're out with their other mates and they're out in other areas, it's a pretense, it's a facade. You know, they're acting out a character, like a TV character or someone they've picked out of a book or out of a movie or something.
Home's home, and you never get what you get from home from anywhere else. And he really, really loved his family, and I don't think that's something that he would have let go permanently.
Veniamin was making serious money stealing cars and dealing marijuana, ecstasy, steroids and speed. He was also taking drugs, which fueled his aggression.
He'd just spiral and keep going like a little spring.
He had a madness sort of in him. You know, I know a lot of people say he didn't take drugs, but I know for a fact he did. You know, and because sometimes he was, you know, completely off his face and incoherent.
He struck me as someone who could get very angry. I understood that about him, particularly in his dealings with the police.
They've seen him as a young kid who used to give them a lot of shit because he wouldn't sit there and say yes sir, no sir. Yeah, it just wasn't Andrew.
If you're dealing with a schizophrenic, the same sort of thing as having another personality, and a word could set him off.
We can now make a new diagnosis. This impulsive behaviour and violence confirms that Benji has antisocial personality disorder. He's behaving aggressively and he's taking huge risks without even considering that there could be negative consequences. Many reckless individuals like Benji have lower resting heart rates and lower levels of arousal, which can leave them with a constant feeling of boredom. So to increase their stimulation and arousal levels, they'll often abuse drugs or alcohol, or they'll take extreme risks, just like Benji's doing.
By now, the Sunshine Police knew Benji well. Whenever a car was stolen locally, he'd automatically be a suspect. So at any hour of the day or night, his parents Apollo and Mariana could have police at their door.
You found yourself, turning around to the parents and saying, look, sorry, we're not here for you. We're here because this is what Andrew's been up to. And then you got to that point that you were doing it a number of times and they just said, look, how much has he been doing? How much has he been up to? Why are you coming around here?
Apollo was fiercely defensive of Andrew. Apollo seemed to me to take the view that Andrew couldn't do much wrong and that it was all the police who were doing the wrong thing. He seemed to me to, he was fiercely defensive of his son.
Benji's parents refuse to believe that the son they love is committing these crimes. But this is the police telling them that he is. Our parents help to establish our attitudes towards authority behaviour, teaches him that he doesn't have to trust or respect the police. He's learning again that the normal rules of society don't apply to him.
By mid-1996, his boxing career had stalled and Benji had himself to blame.
He lacked the discipline of the training all the time. He also liked to have a good time with his mates and get out and party a little bit and what have you. But, to make it in the top level, you've got to have immense discipline. I don't think he would have been anything more than a preliminary fighter.
He turned instead to kickboxing, the perfect outlet for his aggression.
He was absolutely passionate about kickboxing. He almost lived and breathed it. He always had a bit of a strut about him. I know that he was a popular figure amongst, the main event fighters. But he was on the undercard. He was an undercard fighter, but never took a backward step. Would look his opponent in the eye, would stare him down. There's a fair amount of intimidation, I suppose, associated with that. But was just a very popular figure and had a reputation of just being a very fearsome, let's take anybody on type situation.
He just lived life to the fullest. He would have loved to have been a champion kickboxer.
But in 1997, when he failed in his bid for a flyweight title, Benji knew his kickboxing career was over. He no longer needed it. In his criminal life, things were moving. He was operating beyond Sunshine, making connections with the major players in the underworld. Benji marked this by getting heavily tattooed. He made sure the ink on his arms was distinctive and always highly visible.
Tattoos are a funny thing. I think a lot of people get them in the early stages because they want to be noticed. And Andrew desperately wanted to be noticed.
Those sort of trademarks, that's part of him actually moving up the ranks. It was the thrill of being noticed, being recognised, being seen, being feared.
About a third of people who get tattooed do so when they're at a major turning point in their lives. And this is true for Benji, who's crossing to the dark side. He's physically displaying this transition in the most visible way he can. He wants the world to know he's someone to watch out for, someone to be feared.
Veniamin had stayed close to Dino Debra over the years, despite Dino's increasingly erratic behaviour and heavy drug use.
They were great mates. They were full of cheek, full of life, and inseparable, yeah.
They'd often team up for drug dealing and car theft, but Benji suspected that Dino had secretly helped the police. Paranoid and looking for revenge, Benji decided to act. He abducted his mate and shot him twice in the leg.
He was absolutely fearless, would never take a backward step. That in itself was something that other people ultimately regarded as some sort of a qualification for the criminal that he later became.
Veniamin had crossed a line. He'd used a gun and shot a man. He was now on the road to becoming one of Australia's most notorious killers. Benji Veniamin would become a cold-blooded killer, a man feared by even the toughest in the Melbourne ganglands. He was well on his way by the time he'd reached his early 20s. With money flooding in from his drug dealing and car rebirthing, life had never tasted so good, and Benji wanted the world to know it.
The more that I make, the better time that I'll have. And yes, I'll impress all my mates, the 6 mates that I've just taken out, because then they'll see that I'm a man, big fella, and that I can spend all this money.
He loved his dressy sort of stuff, like flary arm shirts, and he liked all see-through type stuff because he had his really nice tattoos and you could really see them.
Regarded himself as a bit of a Lothario, I think. He was always very friendly with my female staff, would often bring flowers in.
He liked girls liked him. And he felt confident with the girls, he didn't feel threatened. And they'd already known about him, they already knew of him, so he felt he didn't have to prove anything to them.
Benji's addicted to the life he's creating. He's filled with fantasies of unlimited power and success, and he craves the admiration. And there are plenty of people who'll be drawn to him and want to be like him, because for them, Benji's now the anti-hero. He's just like the guys in the gangster movies. Benji's living his dreams. He's becoming one of the criminals he used to look up to.
At the age of 23, Benji had latched on to a formidable underworld figure, Mick Gatto, who was linked to the Carlton Crew, an Italian gang fighting for control of Melbourne's drug trade. The former heavyweight boxer, now in the arbitration and mediation business, was said to have loved Benji like a son. But soon, Veniamin started forging links with another power player, the young drug dealer, Carl Williams.
Carl and Andrew were friends, like great friends, more brother friendship, and they just treated each other equal. They knew where they stood with each other. They had a great bond, and nothing was below or above that.
Carl Williams may have looked naive, but he was calculating, vicious, and making millions dealing ecstasy and speed. His success would lead to a war with the Carlton Crew.
Benji has no respect for the law, but he doesn't disregard all authority. It depends where it comes from. The underworld has its own rules and its own authority figures. He looks up to these powerful, strong men who can instruct him in violence and guide his criminal career.
At the age of 24, driven by ambition and the need to increase his status in the underworld, Benji was about to commit the ultimate crime: to kill.
He had to escalate. You couldn't just stay as a person that knocked off cars, a person that produced drugs or traded in drugs. So the ultimate would be to end up as a contract killer in his mind.
In May 1999, bankrupt greengrocer Joseph Kadara was shot dead in a Toorak supermarket car park.
57-year-old Joe Quadara was killed Mafia style, shot several times at close range with a heavy caliber handgun.
This was Veniamin's first victim, a cold-blooded assassination.
One thing that I did hear, which was a bit frightening, was that when he was asked by one of my colleagues how things were going, he said, things are going great. I've got a new job where I wear gloves.
People who have taken lives often speak about their first kill as though they've crossed a threshold. They say killing again is never as difficult. With his first murder, any of Benji's doubts about whether or not he could kill have been swept away. He's found what, in his world, is the ultimate problem-solving tool. From now on, Benji will be able to murder anyone who gets in his way.
Veniamin had murdered, and he'd got away with it. The police didn't connect the small-time criminal from Sunshine with this big-league contract killing. And 12 months later, in May 2000, Veniamin killed again. He shot dead underworld figure Frank Benvenuto outside his home.
Police believe Frank Benvenuto was flagged down only blocks away on Dalgety Road by the contract killer he probably knew.
It was highly well known, certainly in some circles, as to who was killing these people in Melbourne. If other people knew what Andrew was doing, it's beyond belief that Victoria Police Force didn't know what he was doing.
A violent power struggle over Melbourne's drug trade was about to explode. and Benji was spending more and more time with Carl Williams.
We were always together, all of us were always together. It was like a little family. He was just beautiful with the kids. He used to pick my girls up every Tuesday and take them to religious education, and then he'd take them home, bath them, put them in their pyjamas, give them their dinner and put them to bed. He used to lay with my little girl and one of my little girls, and she just idolised him. And he'd put her to sleep and we'd come home, and he was really proud of himself every Tuesday that that was his little task with the girls.
When Roberta talks about Benji this way, you have to wonder, is this relationship real? Are his friendships sincere, or is he merely using his charm to get what he wants? Well, unlike the true psychopath, people with impulsive antisocial personality, like Benji, are capable of feeling for others, and they can form meaningful relationships. But Benji will also be able to switch off his emotions whenever he chooses to.
Veniamin had killed twice, but the next time would be different. He'd be pulling the trigger on a man who'd been his best mate. Benji Veniamin could kill a friend just as easily as he could an enemy. He'd stayed mates with drug dealer and car thief Dino Debra since their school days in Sunshine, but that would count for nothing. In October 2000, they fell out over a drug deal.
A notorious drug dealer and standover man, Debra was shot several times and died at the scene.
Debra was gunned down outside his home by Veniamin and a local thug called Paul Kalapolitis. Dino, the master, had finally been killed by his apprentice.
I find it extraordinary that there's the allegation against Andrew that not only did he become a contract killer, but that he in fact killed Dino. They were the best of mates, inseparable.
It's almost impossible to understand how anyone could kill a man who's been a close friend, like Dino was to Benji. But Benji is different. He can completely disconnect his feelings when the situation calls for it. And his motives for killing Dino are classic. They're revenge and power.
In May 2002, a bloody war was raging between Carl Williams and the Carlton crew when Veniamin made his fourth hit.
Rapid gunfire and one of Melbourne's career criminals, Victor Pearce, is left for dead. It was 9:30 p.m, still plenty of people on Bay Street.
The police turned up the heat.
There were telephone intercepts on him. He was followed. He would have been the first target in Victoria to have virtually a squad working on him full time, having him under surveillance 24 hours a day.
The police raided the Veniamin family home in Sunshine and found a handgun. A few days later, Benji was talking to his girlfriend, a 19-year-old university student. A phone intercept caught her incriminating remark about the weapon.
I don't know, they reckon they found the gun in the fucking kitchen too and that, so...
But you did have it in the kitchen.
What did you fucking say? What the fuck did you just say?
Oh, honey, I'm sorry, I just came out.
My phone's a fucking tap. Fucking talk like that, huh?
Oh my God, I'm really sorry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, shit like that costs fucking people time in jail, you know what I mean?
I would not have liked to have been on the wrong side of him. You only have to listen to some of the thousands of hours of telephone intercepts that the police garnered in relation to Andrew to realise how quickly he could change, even with people he liked.
In October 2002, Veniamin's fifth victim was another former mate, the drug-dealing killer Paul Kalapolitis, who 2 years earlier had helped murder Dino Debra. Benji could turn on anyone.
I couldn't look at Andrew like a violent killer, no. Not the soft, caring, loving family person that we lived with and loved every day. I think because he never would cop any shit from anybody, so therefore people give the impression that you are violent when you don't take shit from people or you answer back when somebody's having a go at you, or to sit there and not say anything, he would have been called a goose or an idiot.
The Melbourne drug trade was booming. and Carl Williams was raking in millions of dollars. Benji, now 26, was finally in the thick of the action.
He was never without a gun, which he carried down the back of his pants, and did so to great effect. I mean, people would not be aware, they couldn't see that he had a gun. And on occasions, people were seduced into thinking that he was unarmed.
In December 2002, Benji quietly switched his allegiance from Gatto and the Carlton crew over to Williams, becoming his unofficial bodyguard. He grew even closer to the wife of his mate and new boss.
I would say, yeah, Andrew was my soulmate, yeah. We were really close and I loved him to death.
But death was now Benji's trade. In April 2003, he killed for the 6th time. Nick the Russian Radev, a drug-dealing rival of Carl Williams, was shot dead outside a cafe in Coburg. In June 2003, facing increasing pressure to stop the mayhem in the underworld, the Victorian police established a special task force called Piranha. The police were watching Veniamin, but had no idea he was a multiple murderer. 2 months after Piranha was set up, there was another killing.
He's just one of 28 Underworld victims, but Mark Malia's death stands out as one of the most gruesome. His body dumped in a wheelie bin, then a drain, and set alight.
In August 2003, Veniamin and Carl Williams were part of a team that tortured and killed Mark Malia over a drug debt. Malia was attacked with a soldering iron before being strangled.
Until this point, torture hasn't been a feature of Benji's criminal career. But when a group of aggressive individuals gets together, such violence becomes much more likely, especially if drugs are involved. And in this world, when death is intended to send a warning to others, torturing the victim rather than killing them quickly delivers a stronger message.
The warring gangs could see that enough was enough. And when peace talks were called, Benji would be a central player. By the end of 2003, Benji Veniamin had killed 7 times. The boy from Sunshine was now the notorious man he'd always wanted to be. But the hard men of the Melbourne underworld were increasingly wary of him.
I think a lot of people got a little bit concerned about him, that he started to attract too much attention to himself. And that was thought by other people more senior than Andrew to be not a good thing.
At Melbourne's Crown Casino on December the 22nd, Benji was centre stage. Mick Gatto had arranged a meeting to try to end the gangland war between the Carlton crew and Carl Williams. But these peace talks would fail, leaving Veniamin walking a dangerous tightrope. Though he'd maintained strong links with Gatto, he was now living in a luxury apartment with Carl and Roberta Williams and their children. He'd also just become a father himself, the result of a casual relationship.
The girl didn't even really know who Andrew was. She didn't even know his surname. So one Saturday morning, I think it was, I made him come and pick me up and we went to the hospital and he was holding the baby and she was crying when he had her and she stopped crying and he said to me, "Look, Bert, look, she knows who her daddy is. She's not crying anymore."
Benji stayed in touch with his daughter, but kept her out of the way of the media, who followed the leading underworld players like they were celebrities. In January 2004, photographers captured Benji and the Williams family entourage when they went on holiday to the Gold Coast, where he lived the high life.
Benji's proud of his job as a hitman. He sees himself as a rock star and he loves being treated like one. In some ways, he's living the male adolescent fantasy, to be feared and adored wherever he goes. But Benji's need to be special has become unbalanced in the extreme, and it leads him to commit acts most of us would consider evil.
Benji may have looked fit, but his health was failing.
He was in constant pain 24 hours a day as a result of a series of quite serious car accidents that he'd had.
Andrew was really sick with pancreatitis about a week and a half before he was killed. He was admitted to hospital. He stayed in hospital about 4 days and then he was released on medication. And he come home and yeah, he was just not really well from that time, yeah.
Benji's relationship with Roberta was also suffering.
We had lots of ups and downs, Andrew and I. Just a week before Andrew was actually killed, we'd had a big dispute. And I was sitting downstairs of our apartment block in the city and I was eating on my own. And I see him walk up and put his face up against the window. And then he was doing silly faces and he come inside and sat down. And I said to him, I'm really happy that you come in, Andrew. I said, because if anything was to happen to you and we weren't talking, I'd never forgive myself. It'd just kill me and I just couldn't live with that. And we sat there and I said, you can go upstairs if you want. And he said, no, I'll sit, you're not eating by yourself. And we shared a soup and my food come and I ate and we went upstairs. Yeah, and restarted our friendship from then.
Their renewed friendship was to be cut short. A phone call from the media would be the first she'd hear about it.
My first thought was Andrew shot somebody or something.
By March 2004, Benji Veniamin was viewed by everyone in the Melbourne underworld, including his friends, as a stick of dynamite with a lit fuse. He was now playing both sides of the war between Carl Williams and the Carlton crew. No one could be sure where his loyalties lay. A police phone intercept showed even his associates like Mick Gatto wanted to know where he stood.
Hello.
What you doing, buddy?
Hey, what's happened to you?
Oh, mate, just
Huh? You give me the ass.
mate. Don't even say that, mate. You'll offend.
I haven't heard from you for a month.
We meant to drop in at that joint where you're there.
Mate, I'm there every day, buddy. Every day we're there.
I promise you, mate. I swear to you, I'm going to come. I want to come.
Mate, anytime you want it, buddy. You know where we are. You're welcome anytime, mate.
Benji would agree to meet Gatto a few days later, on March the 23rd. That morning, he and Carl Williams were at Melbourne Magistrates Court, where a mate's case was being heard. Just after 2 o'clock, Gatto phoned Benji, inviting him to a private meeting at a restaurant in Carlton called La Porcella.
He was very sick and on a lot of medication. And yes, if he was probably himself, he probably wouldn't have attended there.
Benji arrived at La Porcella and, in his usual style, left his Mercedes double parked outside. He and Gatto began their conversation in the restaurant's main room. A few minutes later, they moved to a corridor at the rear of the building. There was an argument, a violent struggle, and then gunshots. Veniamin was hit by 3 bullets. 2 in his neck and 1 in his head.
The phone rang and it was somebody from the media saying there's been a shooting and Andrew's involved. Well, my first thought was Andrew shot somebody or something. I didn't, you don't want to believe that something's happened to him. So I just thought the best out of a worse situation. And I was screaming at Carl saying, we've got to go there and help him. There was police everywhere. It was blocked off everywhere and I'm saying, what's going on? Is Andrew okay? What's happened? And one of the Piranha Task Force members sat me down in the car and leant down and said, look, Roberta, we live in 2 separate worlds. He said, but you've lost one of your own and I'm really sorry. And I said, what do you mean? What's going on? And he said, Andrew's been killed. And I just went crazy. I couldn't believe it, yeah. The media was frantic and Carl was trying to get away from them because it was just insane.
I don't know nothing about it. This is harassment. Get out of here.
Why are you running, mate? If you've got nothing to say, you got nothing to do with it. Don't run away.
Go on, this is like fucking vultures. Get out of here. Someone's just been shot.
I just kept thinking, they're going to bring him out and he'll be okay. It wasn't okay. The day Andrew died was my birthday. It was just a really bad day, a birthday that I'll never celebrate again. Just a really horrible day.
Roberta joined the Veniamin family for a vigil at their home.
We just sat with him, and every day and night leading up to his funeral, we just used to go and sit in there with him and spend as much time as we could until he actually was buried, because we knew we'd never see him again after that. So, yeah, we just worked out how we would cover the gunshot wounds for his parents' sake and for my children's sake.
Andrew Benji Veniamin, the boy from Sunshine, was dead at 28. In just 4 years, he'd sent 7 men to the grave, but police had never been able to charge him with murder. His own funeral was at the church where he had once been an altar boy.
Andrew hated the cold, and I put this big padded jacket that he used to sit on the couch with, I put that in with him. And just special photos and stuff like that. I put a bottle of Moe in there, and a couple of champagne glasses. We'll always love Andrew. Andrew will always be in our heart and memory. Nobody should lose their life in that way.
I think deep down he had some feeling that ultimately he would not live to a ripe old age.
Andrew was always going to, one way or the other, he was going to be somebody. And he wanted to be somebody, and I think that's what he lived for, basically. And I think that took control towards the finish of things and spiralled out of control. And there was, he was an accident waiting to happen. There's no ifs or buts about that.
So exactly why did Benji Veniamin become a killer, and could it have been avoided? Well, he was born an impulsive, stimulation-seeking child who grew up in an environment where violence equaled power. Maybe if he'd succeeded as a boxer, that might have been enough. Benji knew his crimes were wrong, but he just didn't care. And with each murder, he grew more brazen, more unpredictable. Fueled by drug abuse and an unquenchable need for power and money, Benji Veniamin became one of Australia's most ruthless killers.